I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share my life story on the internet, but here we are. I guess I need to get this off my chest. I'm 29 now, and looking back, it feels like my life really began the day I walked away from my family. Not because I wanted to, but because staying was like trying to breathe underwater. My mom died giving birth to me, and as far as my dad was concerned, that was my defining characteristic. I wasn't his son. I was the reason she was gone. The house was like a museum to her. Her clothes still hung in the closet, untouched. Her favorite chair sat in the corner of the living room, permanently empty. The air even smelled like her perfume for years, faint and lingering like a ghost. There were photos of her everywhere. Her smiling, laughing, her pregnant with me. It felt like she was watching everything, even though I never got to meet her. I heard a lot of stories about her growing up. My aunt, my mom's sister, used to tell me how much she wanted me, how she called me her miracle baby after years of struggling to get pregnant. But that always made it worse. She finally got the life she wanted, and I was the price. My dad never outright said he blamed me, but he didn't have to. It was in the way he looked at me, like I was a problem he couldn't fix. He did the basics, made sure I was fed, clothed, and got to school. But that's where it ended. No hugs, no words of encouragement, no sign that he cared about me beyond what he was obligated to do. Most days, he barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was to criticize or, my favorite, compare me to my cousin Evan. Evan's dad, my uncle, died in a car accident when I was 5. Evan was 7 at the time, and after the funeral, he started spending a lot more time at our house. At first, I thought it was cool having him around. He was older, cooler, and seemed like the kind of person who had it all together. But it didn't take long for me to realize his presence wasn't going to make things better for me. If anything, it made things worse. Evan was the kid my dad always wanted. He was outgoing, athletic, charming. I was quiet, awkward, and more interested in books than sports. It was like my dad was finally able to play the role of the proud father he'd never been with me, only it wasn't for me. It was for Evan. "Why can't you be more like Evan?" was something I heard at least once a week. "Evan wouldn't do that," was another classic. I remember one night when I was around 11. I'd spent weeks working on this science project, a solar system model with moving parts. I was so proud of it. It even won first place at the school science fair. I came home that night, clutching my little trophy, ready to show my dad. He was in the living room, laughing with Evan about some basketball game. I walked in, holding the trophy up like it was gold. "Look, Dad, I won." He glanced at me, nodded, and then turned back to Evan. "That's nice," he said, before launching into some story about a game-winning shot Evan had made. I stood there for a few seconds, hoping he'd come back to it, maybe ask me about the project. He didn't. I ended up leaving the trophy on the coffee table and going to my room. Things like that happened all the time. By the time I hit high school, I'd stopped trying to impress him. I focused on my grades, which were good, great, even, but it didn't matter. Evan was the star athlete, the guy everyone liked. My accomplishments were always overshadowed. During one parent-teacher conference, my English teacher told my dad that I was one of the best writers she'd ever taught and that I should consider pursuing a career in it. My dad just grunted and said, "Can he get a scholarship for it?" When it came time to think about college, I worked my ass off to get into a good school. I applied for scholarships, saved up what little I could from part-time jobs, and had everything lined up. All I needed was a bit of help from my dad. I wasn't asking for much, just a little extra to cover the gap. But one night, I overheard him on the phone with Evan, telling him not to worry about tuition because he'd take care of everything. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to soften the blow. "I can't afford to pay for both of you," he said. "Evan needs it more." That was it. That was the moment I realized I was never going to matter to him. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, I'd always be second place in my own family. My dream of going to college was over before it even began. After that conversation with my dad, something inside me broke. I don't know if it was anger, sadness, or just exhaustion, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house anymore. If I stayed, I'd drown in the constant reminders that I wasn't enough, that I'd never be enough. So, 2 weeks later, I packed what little I had into a duffel bag, left a note on the kitchen counter, and walked out the door. I ended up renting a small studio apartment across town. It was the kind of place no one wanted to live in unless they had no other choice. Peeling paint, a fridge that barely worked, and neighbors who yelled through paper-thin walls. But it was mine, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. Money was tight, though. I picked up as many hours as I could at the diner where I worked part-time, bussing tables and scrubbing grease off counters until my arms ached. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the rent and kept the lights on. Nights were the worst. I'd sit in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake. I'd think about the life I could have had if my dad had cared enough to help me, about the dreams I'd put on hold just to survive. But then I'd remind myself that at least now, I was free. Free from the comparisons, the constant disappointment, the weight of trying to be someone I wasn't. Over time, I started to settle into a routine. Work, sleep, repeat. It wasn't much of a life, but it was mine. I tried not to think about my dad or Evan, but every once in a while, I'd hear about them through mutual acquaintances. Evan had gone off to college and was living the kind of life you'd expect. Frat parties, spring break trips, all funded by my dad. Seeing photos of him on social media, smiling in front of some fancy dorm or lounging on a beach, felt like salt in a wound. I blocked him eventually, but the bitterness lingered. Then, about 6 months after I moved out, I ran into my old neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, at the grocery store. She was one of those sweet older ladies who always had cookies and advice ready for anyone who needed them. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Oh, Liam, I haven't seen you in ages." We chatted for a bit, and then she said something that caught me off guard. "Your dad's been asking about you. Says he's worried." I almost laughed. My dad? Worried about me? That was a good one. "I doubt it," I said, trying to brush it off. She gave me a look, the kind only someone who's lived through their fair share of family drama can give. "He's not good at showing it, but he cares. Don't let him push you away for good, sweetheart. Sometimes people need a wake-up call to see what they've been doing wrong." I nodded politely, but inside, I felt my anger boiling up. He cared? Where was that care when I was breaking my back trying to impress him? Where was it when I needed help for college? Mrs. Ellis meant well, but she didn't know the whole story. After that, I tried to forget the conversation, but her words stuck with me. I hated that part of me still wanted to believe her, that I still craved some acknowledgement from him. But I pushed it down and kept moving forward. I didn't need him. I was building a life on my own, and for once, I felt like I was in control. Things started to change when I landed a second job at a bookstore downtown. It didn't pay much, but it felt like a breath of fresh air after the chaos of the diner. The owner, Mr. Callahan, was this gruff, middle-aged guy who had a soft spot for underdogs. "You remind me of me at your age," he told me once, handing me a battered copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "A little lost, but you'll find your way." I didn't believe him at first, but something about working there gave me hope. Being surrounded by books, helping customers find something they love, it made me feel like I was part of something bigger. Mr. Callahan encouraged me to think about going back to school, and for the first time in years, I started to believe it might be possible. Still, no matter how much progress I made, the shadow of my dad and Evan lingered. I couldn't stop wondering what they were up to, if they even noticed I was gone. One night, I gave in and searched Evan's name online. His profile was exactly what I expected. Photos of his perfect college life, captions about chasing dreams, all with that same smug smile. I scrolled through it, feeling a mix of jealousy and anger, until I came across something surprising. A recent post showed him in a suit, shaking hands with a group of older men. The caption read, "Big moves coming soon. Excited for the future." It looked like he was starting some kind of business. The comments were full of congratulations, but all I could think was how much more money my dad would probably throw at him to make it happen. I closed the app and threw my phone on the couch, trying not to let it get to me. I told myself I didn't care, that it didn't matter what they did anymore. But deep down, I knew I was lying. A few weeks after seeing Evan's post, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't pick up. Random calls usually meant telemarketers or scam artists, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, already regretting it. There was a pause on the other end, Then a voice I hadn't heard in almost a year. Liam, it's your dad. I froze. Of all the people I expected to hear from, he wasn't one of them. My first instinct was to hang up, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. He sighed, the kind of sigh that carried a lifetime of mistakes. I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Why? I shot back. You haven't cared what's going on with me for years. Why now? There was a long pause before he finally answered. Because I messed up. I know I did. And I need to make it right. His voice cracked, and for the first time, he sounded vulnerable. It threw me off. My dad was many things, but vulnerable wasn't one of them. I wanted to tell him no, to hang up and keep him out of my life for good. But that same part of me that had always craved his approval whispered, what if he's serious this time? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a diner not far from my apartment, the same place I'd met Evan months before. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked older, thinner, like life had beaten him down in ways I couldn't even imagine. His hands fidgeted with the edge of the menu, and when he saw me, he tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. Liam, he said, standing up awkwardly, thanks for coming. I didn't bother with pleasantries. What do you want? He sat back down, running a hand over his face. I just wanted to talk, to explain. Explain what? I asked, folding my arms. How you spent years treating me like I didn't exist. How you threw everything you had at Evan while I had to scrape by on my own. He flinched at my words, but I didn't care. He deserved to hear it. You're right, he said quietly. I was a terrible father to you. I put all my energy into Evan because I thought it would make up for losing your mom. I thought if I could help him succeed, it would mean her death wasn't in vain. His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That's bullshit, I said, my voice shaking with anger. You could have had 2 sons. You didn't have to pick one over the other. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. I know that now, but it's too late to change what I did. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to believe that he meant it. But another part of me, the part that still remembered all the nights I went to bed feeling invisible, couldn't let it go. Why are you really here? I asked finally. Because I don't think this is just about an apology. He hesitated, then sighed. I'm in trouble, Liam. Financial trouble. I made some bad decisions, and now I'm paying for them. I lost the house. I can barely keep up with the bills. And Evan, he's not helping. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course he's not. Why would he? You taught him to take whatever he wanted without thinking about anyone else. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I failed him too. I don't know what to do. It was the first time I'd ever seen him like this, lost, defeated, almost begging. And as much as I wanted to hate him, to throw his failures back in his face, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity. He looked like a man who had finally realized the cost of his mistakes, and it was written all over his face. But pity didn't mean I was going to bail him out. I'm sorry you're going through this, I said, keeping my voice steady. But I can't help you. I spent years cleaning up the messes you made in my life. I'm not going to clean this one up too. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. I understand, he said quietly. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. I should have said it a long time ago, but I am. His words hit harder than I expected, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I wanted to believe him, to let those words heal the wounds he'd left behind, but I wasn't sure if I could. I have to go, I said, standing up. He didn't try to stop me. Take care of yourself, Liam, he said as I walked away. I didn't look back. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I realized my hands were shaking. His apology, his regret. It didn't erase the past, but it felt like something shifted. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of his approval anymore. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need it. The meeting with my dad lingered in my mind for days. I tried to push it away, bury it under work and my night classes, But his words kept circling back. He said he was proud of me. He said he was sorry. It wasn't much, not enough to fix years of neglect, but it was more than I ever expected to hear from him. I didn't know how to feel about it. Was it relief? Anger? Maybe both. A week later, I got a call from my old neighbor, Mrs. Ellis. She'd always been the neighborhood's unofficial historian, the one who knew everyone's business without being nosy. When I picked up, her familiar warm voice greeted me. Liam. Oh, I'm glad you answered. I've been meaning to call you, she said, skipping right over any formalities. What's up, Mrs. Ellis? I asked, leaning against the counter in my kitchen. It's about your dad, she said, her tone softening. I thought you should know. He's not doing well. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Yeah, I know. He told me about the house. It's more than just the house, she said. He's been struggling for a while now, ever since that business with Evan's company. He put everything he had into helping Evan, and when it all fell apart, he lost, well, everything. My chest tightened. I'd heard bits and pieces about Evan's failed business, how my dad had remortgaged the house to fund it, how the whole thing tanked within a year. Hearing it confirmed made it feel more real, though. I don't know what you want me to do about it, I said finally. He made his choices. I know, sweetheart, she said gently, but I think he's finally starting to realize how much he hurt you. He talks about you, you know? Says he wishes he could go back and do things differently. That caught me off guard. He does. All the time, she said. He's too proud to say it to your face, but I think he's hoping for another chance. You don't have to give it to him, of course. I just thought you should know. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to keep him at arm's length where he couldn't hurt me anymore. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the little boy who just wanted his dad to notice him, wondered if maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to prove he'd changed. Before I could decide what to do, life threw another curveball. A few days later, I got a message from Evan. It wasn't long, just a single line. Can we talk? At first, I thought about ignoring it. Evan had always been good at making things about him, and I wasn't interested in hearing whatever sob story he had prepared. But then curiosity got the better of me, and I replied, "What do you want?" He responded almost immediately, "I just need to explain. Please." We agreed to meet at the same diner where I'd met my dad. When I walked in, Evan was already there, sitting in a booth with his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. He looked different, still polished, but there was something tired in his eyes, like life had finally caught up with him. "Thanks for coming," he said when I sat down. "Cut to the chase," I said. "What do you want?" He flinched but nodded, like he knew he had it coming. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. I wanted to apologize. That was not what I was expecting. Apologize for what? "For everything," he said, his voice heavy. "For how I treated you growing up. For taking everything Dad gave me without thinking about what it cost you. I didn't see it back then, but now," he trailed off, staring into his coffee. "Now what?" I prompted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Now I see how much I screwed up," he said. "The business failing. It made me realize I wasn't as invincible as I thought. And watching Dad fall apart because of me, I can't undo what I did, but I want to make it right." I crossed my arms, leaning back in the booth. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" He hesitated, then said, "I don't know yet, but I'm trying. I've been looking for work, trying to pay off what I can. It's not much, but it's a start." I studied him, trying to figure out if he was being sincere or just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. For once, he seemed genuine, but that didn't mean I was ready to forgive him. "I'm glad you're trying," I said finally. "But don't think one apology is going to fix years of being treated like I didn't matter." "I don't expect it to," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." His words hit harder than I wanted to admit. For so long, I'd carried around this anger toward Evan, this resentment for the way he seemed to get everything handed to him while I got left behind. Hearing him own up to it didn't erase the past, but it did take some of the weight off my shoulders. When we left the diner, he stopped me outside. "For what it's worth, I think you're stronger than I ever was, he said. You didn't have anyone helping you, and you still made something of yourself. I respect that. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and walked away. As I headed home, his words echoed in my mind. It didn't fix everything, but it felt like a start. Maybe not for us as brothers, but for me. I wasn't sure where this road would lead, but for the first time, it felt like I wasn't walking it alone. After that meeting with Evan, I felt like the air around me had shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change. I didn't wake up the next morning free of all the anger and bitterness I'd carried for years, but something was different. His apology, as unexpected as it was, felt like someone had lifted a corner of the weight that had been pressing down on me for so long. I wasn't sure what to do with it, though. Forgiving him wasn't a switch I could flip, and I still had no idea what it would take for me to truly move on. I tried to focus on my own life. My classes were going well, and the bookstore job had become a place of stability for me. Mr. Callahan, the owner, was always throwing books my way, saying things like, "This one will change how you see the world," or "You'll thank me after this." He'd become something of a mentor to me, though he'd probably scoff if I called him that to his face. One day, after a particularly busy shift, he handed me a book and said, "You know, you've got potential, kid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I smiled, but inside, I felt a pang of doubt. It wasn't just about potential, it was about what you did with it. And for so long, I'd felt like I was trying to dig myself out of a hole that someone else had thrown me into. Still, his words stayed with me. Maybe I was finally starting to believe that I could build something for myself, something that had nothing to do with my dad or Evan. But, of course, the past wasn't ready to let me go just yet. A few weeks later, my dad called again. This time, I didn't hesitate to answer, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I was curious, or maybe some part of me hoped things might be different. "Liam," he said, his voice tired but calm. "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He hesitated. "Would you consider coming over for dinner? Just once. I think it's time we had a real conversation. All of us." "All of us?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Me, you, and Evan," he said. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I think it's important." I wanted to say no, to tell him I'd had enough of his sudden desire to play family after years of neglect. But something about his tone stopped me. It wasn't desperation. It was something quieter, almost like hope. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived at his apartment, a smaller, cheaper place he'd moved into after losing the house, I wasn't sure what to expect. The building was older, with peeling paint and a rickety staircase that creaked under my feet. When he opened the door, he looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if I'd actually show up. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The apartment was modest, a far cry from the house I'd grown up in, but it felt lived in. There were signs of effort, clean dishes in the sink, a small stack of books on the coffee table, and even a photo of my mom on the wall. I hadn't seen that photo in years, and seeing it now stirred something in me I couldn't quite name. Evan was already there, sitting at the kitchen table. He gave me a small nod as I walked in, and I returned it, though neither of us said anything. My dad gestured for me to sit, and I did, the awkward silence between us stretching out like a rubber band ready to snap. "I'm glad you both came," my dad said finally, sitting down across from us. He looked between me and Evan, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "I know I failed you both in different ways, and I know I can't fix the past, but I want to try and be better. For both of you." Evan was the first to speak. "You don't have to say this for me, Dad," he said quietly. "We've already talked about it." "I know," my dad said, his gaze shifting to me, "but I haven't said it to Liam, and I need to." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I don't need a speech," I said. "I need to know why. Why now? Why does it take losing everything for you to see what you had?" He didn't flinch, but his shoulders slumped slightly, like my words were a weight he couldn't carry. "Because I was scared," he said. "I was scared of losing what little I had left, and in trying to hold on to it, I pushed you away. I thought if I could just make things right for Evan, it would somehow make up for everything I got wrong with your mom. But all I did was hurt both of you." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him that his realization came too late, that I didn't need his regrets now. But another part of me, the part that was still that little boy holding up a science fair trophy, hoping for a pat on the back, just wanted to believe him. "I can't forget the past," I said finally. "I can't forget how you made me feel, like I wasn't enough. But maybe I can try to move forward." He nodded, his expression a mix of relief and something close to gratitude. "That's all I can ask," he said quietly. Dinner was awkward, but not unbearable. There were long silences, but there were also moments of tentative connection. A shared joke, a memory of my mom, even a laugh or two. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could figure out how to be a family again. Or at least something close to it. The dinner with my dad and Evan lingered in my mind for days. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Maybe the first step toward clearing the wreckage of the past. Still, I wasn't ready to dive headfirst into rebuilding those relationships. I needed space, and I needed to focus on myself. About a week later, I got a call from Evan. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Liam," he started, his voice unusually steady. "I know I've already apologized, but I need to ask for something. Not for me. For Dad. What do you want?" I said, already wary. "It's about the debt," he said. "I've been working on a way to help him get out of it. I know it's not my place to ask, but I could use your help." I almost laughed. "Help? You mean you want me to bail him out after everything? Is that a joke?" "It's not about bailing him out," he said quickly. "It's about showing him that we're not just waiting for him to fail again. I know he made mistakes. I've made mistakes. But I'm trying to fix this. He's trying too." I hesitated, the weight of his words pressing on me. For so long, I'd carried the bitterness of being overlooked, the anger of being cast aside. But now, standing on the other side of it, I realized something. Holding on to that resentment wasn't hurting them anymore. It was only hurting me. "Fine," I said finally. "What's the plan?" Evan explained that he'd found a buyer for the house my dad lost, someone willing to sell it back at a reduced price if we could come up with the down payment. It wasn't about getting the house itself. It was about giving my dad a fresh start, a way to stabilize without the crushing debt. Evan had already put together most of the money, but he needed help closing the gap. It wasn't an easy decision. Part of me wanted to walk away, let them figure it out without me. But another part, the one that had been searching for some kind of closure, knew this was my chance to finally let go of the past. So I agreed. The three of us met again, this time at the old house. It felt strange standing in front of it, the place where so much of my life had unraveled. The yard was overgrown, the paint was peeling, but it still felt like home in a way I hadn't expected. When my dad saw me, his face lit up with something I hadn't seen in years, hope. "You didn't have to come," he said softly. "Yeah, well," I replied, shoving my hands in my pockets. "I guess I wanted to see how this ends." We finalized the deal that day. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't cheap, but we got it done. When the papers were signed, my dad just stood there, looking at the keys in his hand like he couldn't believe they were real. Then he looked at me and Evan, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "I don't deserve this, but thank you." For the first time, I believed he meant it. We didn't suddenly become a perfect family after that. There were still awkward silences, unresolved tensions, and moments when I wanted to walk away. But there were also moments of connection, small, fragile, but real. We started meeting for dinner once a month, nothing fancy, just a way to stay in each other's lives. Slowly, we were figuring out what it meant to move forward. As for me, I kept working, kept studying, and kept building the life I wanted. The anger I'd carried for so long started to fade, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I didn't need my dad's approval anymore, and I didn't need to compete with Evan. For the first time, I felt like I was enough, just as I was. Looking back, I don't know if I'd call it a happy ending. Life isn't that simple. But it was an ending that felt real, one where I could finally close the book on the past and start writing my own story. And for me, that was enough.